Access appears constant. Routes remain visible. Connections seem stable. Systems continue to operate across distance as if movement were uninterrupted. But access is never guaranteed. This is Achronic, a long-form documentary series about power, geography, and time. Not events, not heroes, not chronology, structures that outlast empires. Access is not uniform. It exists along gradients. Some connections are stable, others remain conditional, and some exist only intermittently. This variation reflects the degree to which systems are aligned with the pathways that sustain movement. The more aligned a system is, the more reliable its access becomes. The less aligned it is, the more access depends on external conditions, not distance, but structure. Access depends on continuity. It requires that movement remains possible across the pathways that connect systems. But those pathways are limited. They are constrained by geography, defined by infrastructure, and sustained through conditions that are not permanent. What appears as stable connection is, in reality, sustained alignment between routes, between systems, between the conditions that allow movement to continue. When that alignment holds, access appears natural, unquestioned, expected, but it is not inherent. It is sustained, and this continuity introduces dependency, because access does not belong to a single system. It exists within a network of conditions that must remain stable for movement to continue. When any part of that network shifts, access changes, not gradually, but structurally. Routes that once supported movement become restricted. Connections that appeared stable become uncertain. What was assumed becomes conditional. This reveals a fundamental condition. Access is not defined by presence alone. It is defined by continuity. Being connected is not the same as remaining connected, because connection can exist without stability, but access requires both. This creates a threshold. On one side, movement flows without interruption. On the other, it becomes uncertain. Crossing that threshold does not always require distance. It requires disruption. Even small changes can alter the conditions that sustain access. This fragility is not a flaw. It is a structural feature. Systems that depend on continuity must remain sensitive to disruption, because disruption does not need to be large to be effective. It only needs to occur at the points where movement is already constrained. At those points, small changes produce disproportionate effects, not because the system is weak, but because it is concentrated. When movement slows, access weakens. When movement stops, access disappears. Not because the connection no longer exists, but because it no longer functions. This is why access cannot be understood as a permanent condition. It is not secured by proximity or by past integration. It is sustained by present conditions, and those conditions are always changing. Over time, systems adapt to this uncertainty. They reinforce certain routes. They prioritize stability. They attempt to reduce dependency. But dependency cannot be eliminated, because access always depends on factors beyond any single system's control. This creates asymmetry. Some systems can influence access. Others must depend on it. This imbalance is not accidental. It emerges from the structure of movement itself, because movement is concentrated, and where movement concentrates, control emerges. Access becomes a function of that control, not as an abstract principle, but as a practical condition. Who can move? Where movement is allowed, when it is interrupted, and when it is restored. This is why stability can be misleading. When access is uninterrupted, it appears permanent. Systems adapt to this continuity. They assume persistence. But what is continuous is not necessarily stable. It is simply uninterrupted. And interruption does not require collapse, only a shift in the conditions that sustain movement. When that shift occurs, access does not gradually decline. It changes, from assumed to conditional, from stable to uncertain. This is why access is never guaranteed. Not because systems fail, but because the conditions that sustain them are never fixed. They must be sustained, continuously, and continuity is never neutral. It reflects the structure of the system, not as it appears, but as it functions beneath the surface, which means access is not inherent. It does not persist on its own. It exists only as long as the conditions that sustain movement remain aligned, and alignment is never permanent, which means access is never secured, only sustained, for as long as the system allows it.